It's the end of the month. You open your bank account, and for a second, you just stare at the screen. You know you made money. You know you worked hard. You didn't buy anything crazy, and you didn't do anything that felt financially irresponsible. And yet somehow it feels like your money quietly slipped out the back door. So you start wondering, wait, am I just bad with money? Then you go online and the advice only makes things worse. One person tells you to track every single dollar in a spreadsheet. Another says the only way to build wealth is to earn more and invest aggressively. And for a moment, it feels like the message is simple. If you want to be wealthy, you need to stop enjoying your life. But here's the thing, most people don't need more guilt around money. They need a better way to make decisions with it, a realistic approach that actually fits into normal life. Because building wealth isn't just about how much you earn, and it isn't just about how much you save. The biggest factor lies in something most people never really think seriously about. Because one small change in the way you spend money can start changing what your financial life looks like 5 years from now. And in this video, I'm going to show you what that change is, why it works, and how simple spending decisions can create real financial momentum over time. My name is Ben, and I have to admit I'm completely fascinated by the world of personal finance. And if, like me, you've ever felt that your paycheck should be doing more for you than it is today, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like if this video helps you. Let me ask you something. Have you ever looked back at the last few years of your life and wondered where all the progress went? Not just financially, in general. Because sometimes life feels strange. You work, you stay busy, you solve problems, you handle responsibilities. Every week feels full. Every month disappears faster than the last one. Yet somehow, when you stop and look around, it feels like you're standing in almost the same place. A lot of people feel that way about money. And what's interesting is that most of them immediately focus on one thing, how much they're spending. They assume the solution must be spending less, cut more, save more, restrict more. But that's not the thought that changed the way I look at money. The thought that changed everything was much simpler. Your financial future is being built whether you're paying attention to it or not, every single day, right now. The question isn't whether you're building something. The question is what you're building, because money does something most people never think about. It quietly amplifies direction. If your financial decisions are pointing you toward freedom, money helps you get there faster. If they're pointing somewhere else, money helps you get there faster too. That's why two people can earn similar incomes, live in similar cities, and work similar jobs, yet end up in completely different financial situations a few years later. The difference often isn't effort. The difference is direction. Think about a plane leaving Los Angeles for New York. If the pilot changes the route by just a few degrees, nobody on board notices. The passengers sit in the same seats. The engines sound the same. The experience feels identical. But several hours later, that plane ends up in a completely different place. Money works in a surprisingly similar way. Most financial outcomes aren't created by dramatic decisions. They're created by direction repeated over time. And that's where things get interesting. Because most people spend a lot of time thinking about how much money they have, but very little time thinking about where their financial habits are leading them. They focus on amounts, they focus on balances, they focus on paychecks. Very few people focus on trajectory. Where is this actually taking me? That's a very different question. And once you start asking it, you begin to realize something that can feel a little uncomfortable. The same amount of money can create completely different results depending on how it's being used. Same dollars, same economy, same year, completely different destination. Which raises a fascinating question. If spending itself isn't what separates those futures, then what does? A simple idea that economists have talked about for years can help answer that question. Most people never hear about it outside of school, which is funny because it affects almost every financial decision they make. This idea is called opportunity cost. The name sounds more complicated than the idea itself. Opportunity cost is simply what you give up when you choose one option over another. That's it. And once you start looking for it, you begin seeing it everywhere. Imagine you spend $500 on something in your mind. That decision costs $500. That seems obvious. The money leaves your account. The transaction is over. You move on. But something else happened at the exact same moment. That $500 lost the opportunity to become something else. For example, if that money had been invested in a simple S&P 500 index fund and earned around 8% per year, which is close to the long-term historical average, 5 years later, it could have grown to roughly 735. Suddenly, that purchase has two price tags. The visible one says $500. The invisible one says 735. Most people see the first number. Almost nobody sees the second. And that's what makes this idea so powerful. Because the hidden cost isn't attached to one purchase. It's attached to every purchase, Every dollar you spend is standing at a fork in the road. One path gives you something now, the other gives your future self more options. What's fascinating is that neither path feels dramatic in the moment. That's why these decisions are so easy to overlook. Nobody feels like they're making a life-changing financial choice on a random Tuesday afternoon. Most financial decisions feel small while they're happening. The impact shows up much later, a few months from now, a few years from now, sometimes much longer. And that's why looking only at the price can be misleading. The price tells you what something costs today. It doesn't tell you what that money could have become. That's a completely different story. Once you start seeing money this way, something shifts. You stop asking whether something is expensive. You start noticing what you're trading away to get it. And for the first time, you begin to realize that some of the most important financial decisions you'll ever make don't look important at all when you're making them, which leads to an interesting realization. Maybe the biggest threat to your financial future isn't the expensive stuff everyone loves talking about. Maybe it's hiding somewhere much closer to everyday life. And what made me realize this was a recent conversation I had with a friend who was completely frustrated with his finances. He wasn't reckless, he wasn't constantly buying expensive things. In fact, he was convinced he was pretty responsible with money. His explanation was always the same: I don't even spend that much. And honestly, he believed it. Then one weekend, he decided to go through his bank statements, not because he expected to find anything, mostly out of curiosity. A few hours later, he called me, and the first thing he said was, I think I figured out where my money is going. The surprising part? It wasn't one thing. There wasn't a giant purchase sitting in the middle of the statement. No luxury car, no expensive watch. Instead, it was food deliveries, apps, streaming subscriptions, small upgrades, random purchases that felt justified at the time. Nothing seemed particularly dangerous. If you showed him any individual transaction, he could probably justify it, and that's exactly why it was so hard to notice. Each decision made sense on its own. The problem only appeared when all those decisions were sitting side by side. That's when the pattern became impossible to ignore. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. Because when we imagine financial mistakes, we imagine dramatic moments, huge risks, huge losses. But real life is usually much quieter than that. Most people don't damage their finances with one giant decision. They do it with decisions that feel completely reasonable in the moment, and that's exactly what makes them dangerous. You don't question them. You barely notice they happened. Little by little, they become part of your routine. And when something becomes routine, your brain stops paying attention to it. It starts running in the background, almost like autopilot, which creates a problem. Because if your financial habits are running on autopilot, who's actually making the decisions? Well, here's the interesting part. A lot of the time, the decision isn't being made by the version of you that's thinking about the next 5 years. It's being made by the version of you that exists right now. The version that says, I've worked hard, I deserve this. And honestly, there's nothing unusual about that. In fact, I'm pretty sure you've probably experienced it yourself. You walk into a store planning to buy one thing and leave with 3. You get paid on Friday and suddenly everything feels affordable. A few days later, you start wondering where some of the money went. And when that happens, it's possible to see that your brain naturally prioritizes what feels good now over what might feel good later. Behavioral economists actually have a name for this. It's called present bias. And the idea behind it is surprisingly simple. Future rewards sound nice. Immediate rewards feel real. That's why spending $100 today often feels easier than investing $100 for your future. The problem isn't the math. The challenge is that one option gives you a benefit right now. The other asks you to wait, and waiting rarely feels exciting. That's why so many financial decisions have very little to do with intelligence. They're emotional. They're made in specific moments, when you're tired, when you're bored, when you're stressed. The decision feels small. The effect shows up much later. And once you realize that, something starts to make sense. Building wealth isn't just about understanding money. It's about understanding the situations where you're most likely to make decisions that your future self wouldn't make. Because the biggest obstacle between you and financial progress might not be a lack of knowledge. It might be the fact that your brain is constantly trying to trade the future for the present. Which brings us to the one change that can completely alter that pattern. And this is where everything starts to come together. Because if your brain is constantly trying to trade the future for the present, then the question isn't how to become more disciplined. The question is how to make better decisions in the moments that actually matter. This is where the change comes in. Understanding this in a practical way makes simple rules much easier to follow. For example, imagine using the $100 rule. Any non-essential purchase over $100 has to wait 24 hours. That's it. No complicated budgeting system, just a pause. Now imagine that pause helps you avoid just 2 impulse purchases per month. That's $200. invested consistently over 5 years, with average market returns that could grow to roughly $14,000 to $15,000. Not because you earned more money, but because you made slightly different decisions. Here's another example. Let's say you want to upgrade your phone. Great. Enjoy it. But use a simple 50-50 rule. If you spend $800 on the upgrade, invest another $800 as well. Now imagine doing that just twice a year. Over 5 years, that's $8,000 invested. With growth, you'd be looking at roughly $9,500 to $10,000. You still get the upgrade. Your future benefits too. Both versions of you win. And then there's the simplest example of all. Looking for small expenses you've stopped paying attention to. Maybe it's a subscription you barely use anymore. Maybe it's a few purchases that seemed harmless on their own but kept adding up month after month. The goal isn't to cut everything, it's simply to find enough room in your budget to free up an extra $300 per month. Invested in a simple diversified ETF or a retirement account earning an average return of around 8% per year, that extra $300 per month could grow to roughly $22,000 in just 5 years. And that's when you start noticing something. None of these examples require a higher income. None of them require a miracle investment. The change wasn't earning more money. The change was changing the question behind the decision. And once that question changes, the way you spend money starts changing with it, which creates a completely different relationship with spending itself. And that's what starts to change once you begin asking better questions. You stop looking at spending as simply good or bad, because the truth is not every expense deserves to be treated the same way. Some purchases disappear the moment you make them. Others keep creating value long after the money is gone. Think about the difference between buying something that creates a few minutes of excitement and buying something that improves your life for years. Those are not the same type of purchase, yet most people treat them as if they are. A useful way to think about it is this. Some purchases are fireworks. They seem exciting for a few seconds. They grab your attention. They create a moment of excitement, and then they disappear. Other purchases are seeds. They don't always seem exciting at first. In fact, they can even seem a little boring, but they have the potential to keep growing long after they're made. A book that teaches you a valuable skill, a certification that helps you earn more, a tool that makes your work more efficient. The difference isn't the amount of money being spent, it's what that money continues doing after it's spent. And once you start looking at purchases through that lens, something becomes obvious. 2 purchases can cost exactly the same amount, but one leaves you exactly where you are, while the other moves you forward. That's why one of the most powerful questions you can ask before spending money is surprisingly simple. Will this purchase still be adding value to my life a year from now? Not every purchase needs to do that. Life is meant to be enjoyed too. But if a larger portion of your money is buying progress instead of temporary excitement, your financial future starts looking very different. Because over time, progress compounds too. And that's exactly where many people underestimate what's possible to build over the next 5 years. And most people miss this when they think about building wealth. They imagine wealth being built when money gets invested, when money enters the market, when returns start showing up, when compound growth begins doing its thing. But in reality, wealth usually starts being built a few minutes earlier. It starts at the moment the decision is made, the moment you decide what your next dollar is going to do. Because every dollar eventually falls into one of 2 categories. It either disappears or it goes to work for you. And over the course of a week, that decision doesn't seem very important. Over the course of a month, it may not seem very important either. But over the course of 5 years, those decisions begin stacking on top of each other in ways that are difficult to appreciate in the moment. That's why the goal was never to stop spending money. The goal was always to become more intentional, to make sure more of your money is helping the future version of you instead of constantly working against it. Because 5 years from now, you probably won't remember most of the things you almost bought this month, but your financial life won't forget them. Your financial life will remember every dollar you redirected, every habit you improved, every time you chose progress over impulse. And that's why a single change in the way you spend money can have such a massive impact over time, not because one decision changes everything, but because one decision changes the next one, and then the next one, and eventually, what started as a small shift becomes a completely different financial future. Now, let's bring everything together. We've talked about spending without intention. We've talked about the hidden cost behind every financial decision. We've talked about why your brain naturally prefers rewards today over rewards tomorrow. And we've talked about the simple change that can completely transform the way you look at money. Not asking, can I afford this? But asking, is this helping me build the life I want in 5 years? Because at the end of the day, building wealth doesn't mean being perfect. It doesn't mean never spending money. And it definitely doesn't mean giving up everything you enjoy. It means making sure a larger portion of your money is buying progress instead of simply disappearing. 5 years from now is going to arrive whether you prepare for it or not. The only question is what your financial life will look like when that moment gets here. Will you still be wondering where your money went? Or will you be looking at the result of thousands of small decisions that finally started working in your favor? Because the future version of you is being built right now, one decision at a time, $1 at a time, and one question at a time. So before your next purchase, ask yourself, is everything I'm choosing to do with my money today helping me build the life I want to have 5 years from now? If this video helped you see money a little differently, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And I'm curious, what spending habit would you like to change over the next 5 years? Let me know in the comments.